Good morning. I'm very thankful for this opportunity to speak before you. I did get to print out an outline, so there are outlines. If you don't have one and you would like one, if you would raise your hand, Daniel will get you one. I am trying to do my best pop-up impression this morning. I printed off an outline. I got on a nice suit, so maybe it pseudo feels like he's here. So I'm trying my best to replicate him. But as always, I am very thankful for this opportunity to speak to you. I always enjoy the opportunity to present a lesson and to study and to prepare for it. It's always some of the best time for myself, and I hope that you can gain something from what we're going to talk about this morning. And if you have an outline, you see that we're going to talk about how Jesus sees us. And in my mind, there are several times throughout the Bible that we see Jesus looking at people throughout different points in their lives, whether that be physically while he was here on earth or from heaven, and looking at the things that they do. And I love this imagery of Jesus coming face to face with people and looking and examining their lives. And as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about all the different points that he sees people in their lives, and I started to think about my mom, because she has seen me as the cute little baby. She's seen me as the weird little kid. She's seen me as the immature teenager. And now she sees me as the husband and father, hopefully just slightly more mature than I was before. But she's a person who has seen me through different stages in my life. She's seen how I was, what I learned, what I did, and has watched me grow throughout that entire process. And that is just how Jesus looks down on us. He looks down and he sees us through different stages in our lives, and he examines and looks at us and sees what is happening and how we are growing. And so this morning we're going to look at 4 examples of Jesus looking at people, and we're going to examine what was going on in their life at that time and see what we can learn from it. And so we're going to look at Saul, Peter, Zacchaeus, and Stephen. And so we're going to begin with Saul as our first example. And if you would turn to Acts chapter 9, verses 1 through 6. We'll begin by reading this. And this section of verses is whenever Saul is confronted by Jesus on the road to Damascus. And so starting in verse 1 of Acts 9, it says, "And Saul, yet breathing out threatenings and slaughter against the disciples of the Lord, went unto the high priest, and desired of him letters to Damascus to the synagogue, that if he found any of this way, whether they were men or women, he might bring them unto bond unto Jerusalem. And as he journeyed, he came near Damascus, and suddenly there shined round about him a light from heaven. And he fell to the earth, and heard a voice saying unto him, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? And he said, Who art thou, Lord? And the Lord said, I am Jesus, whom thou persecutest. It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. And he, trembling and astonished, said, Lord, what wilt thou have me to do? And the Lord said unto him, Arise and go into the city, and it shall be told thee what thou must do. So here we see Saul confronted face to face with Jesus through this bright light that eventually blinds him, as we know. And at this point, Saul was on his way to Damascus to round up and imprison Christians, to persecute Christ's church and to persecute Christ himself. And as Saul is fighting directly against him, Jesus looks at him and asks him a simple question. Why are you persecuting me? Why are you fighting against me so much? And whenever Jesus looks at Saul, he sees him standing in direct opposition to him. He is directly fighting against Jesus. There is no other way that he could have been more against Jesus than at this moment. And it's a scary, scary thought. But at some point or another, all of us have either been in Saul's shoes or we will be in Saul's shoes, where we look at our lives and we say something is wrong. Hopefully we're not imprisoning and killing other Christians, but there is a point in your life where you look and say, I am standing opposed to God. What he wants me to do, the things that he is asking me to do, I am doing the exact opposite. I'm tearing people down, I'm pushing people away from the church, and I am standing in opposition to God. And we're told that once we hit that age of accountability, we begin to sin. And that sin is what puts us in opposition to God. It doesn't have to be anything as extreme as what Saul had done, but that sin that we commit puts us in opposition to God, where we are standing face to face with Jesus, and he looks at us and says, "Why are you persecuting me? Why are you fighting against me?" And now that is a very dreary and sad thought, but the beautiful part of Acts 9 is that it doesn't end with Jesus saying, "You're persecuting me." He tells him to go to Damascus and be told what he should do. And as we read through the rest of Acts 9, we know that Saul goes in to Damascus and finds a man named Ananias who tells him to be baptized. So Jesus sees Saul standing directly against him, the enemy of Jesus, and he looks at him and he says, "You're fighting against me, you're kicking against me, but I have a way for you to reconcile this relationship. I have a way for you to no longer be opposed to me, but stand with me through baptism." And as I said, we are all eventually going to stand like Saul did, opposed to Jesus. Or maybe we already have. And we will be faced with the decision of how we respond. Will we respond like Saul? Will we go seek out that salvation that Jesus offers and find him through baptism? Or will we continue to fight against him and stand in opposition? And our response to that question will determine our eternal fate. And so then our next example is that of Peter in Mark 14:66 through 72. And this is the second of our more negative examples. And this section of Mark is leading up to the crucifixion of Christ. All the steps are being taken. Christ is being led to the point where he will be crucified. And Mark 14:66 through 72 is the account of Peter denying Jesus 3 times. And just before this, Peter was asked, Jesus told all his disciples, "You are going to deny me. I will be alone." And Peter said, "No, Lord, I will not leave you. I will stand by your side." And Jesus looked at him and said, "You're going to deny me 3 times. And so reading in verse 66, it says, "And as Peter was beneath in the palace, there cometh one of the maids of the high priest. And when she saw Peter warming himself, she looked upon him and said, And thou also wast with Jesus of Nazareth. But he denied, saying, I know not, neither understand I what thou sayest. And he went out into the porch, and the cock crowed. And a maid saw him again, and began to say to them that stood by, This is one of them. This is one of them. And he denied it again. And a little after, they that stood by said again to Peter, Surely thou art one of them. For thou art a Galilean, and thy speech agreeth thereto. But he began to curse and to swear, saying, I know not this man of whom ye speak. And the second time the cock crew. And Peter called to mind the words that Jesus said unto him, Before the cock crow twice, thou shalt deny me thrice. And when he thought thereon, he wept. Here we see that Jesus is in the moment of his most loneliest part. Peter had said, I will stand by you no matter what. And then people start pressing Peter and saying, Oh, you knew this Jesus man. He says, no. They're like, no, I'm pretty sure you knew Jesus. He says, no. They're like, no, you know Jesus. The way you're talking gives you weight. He goes, no, I don't. And he starts to curse. He starts to yell at them. He starts to prove that he did not stand by this Jesus man. And though it's not recorded, in my mind, I imagine Peter looking at Jesus as he's being prepared to be sacrificed, to be crucified, and Jesus looking back at him and seeing what had just happened, seeing that Peter had denied him so strongly. And though it's not recorded, this is what is in my mind, because Jesus knew that Peter had done this. And so as Peter's going through this, he obviously knew what had happened, because he instantly begins to cry. This happens, he denies him the 3rd time, and he begins to cry because he knew the mistakes that he had made. And this is a situation, again, that all of us are either familiar with or will be familiar with. When you're living your life and you're committed and you say, yes, I'm going to live for you, Jesus, and then things get hard, things get tough, and you start to falter. You start to fail. You start to say, oh no, that's not my life. I don't live that way. I don't say those things, right? I don't stand for that. And we begin to sin. We begin to fall away. And at that moment, there's something inside of you that says, what are you doing? What have you done? You have sinned against God. And again, it comes down to a decision. Peter could have denied Jesus 3 times and then continued to deny him and continued to fight against him. but instead he wept. And it's not recorded, but we know that Peter later repented because he went on to be a great servant for Christ after his crucifixion. And so as Christians, there are going to be times where we find ourselves in sin, where Jesus looks at our lives and we're standing in sin. And the question again arises, what will we do? Will we look at our lives and will we, like Peter, with sorrow return to God and say, I'm sorry for what I've done. Please forgive me and I will live this life for you again? Or will we ignore the fact that we've sinned and continue to push into that life of sin? And so these two examples really show a time that Jesus looks down and sees a negative part of our life. And I am a person who really likes to get the negative out of the way, so then we can talk about the good things. And so now these last two examples, I look at them as positive examples of how Jesus sees us in our lives and what we should be doing. Let's talk about Zacchaeus, the wee little man of Zacchaeus. We're going to be reading in Luke 19, verses 1 through 10. And I don't remember when this happened, but we were talking about Zacchaeus when we were reading this, and I realized how powerful of a message that was found in there, and the fact that it went along so well with this, and I just love this passage. So starting in verse 1, it says, And Jesus entered and passed through Jericho, and behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus, which was the chief among the publicans, and he was rich. And he sought to see Jesus, who he was, and could not for the press, because he was of little stature. And he ran before and climbed up in a sycamore tree to see him, for he was to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and saw him, and said unto him, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must abide at thy house. And he made haste and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all murmured, saying that he was gone to be a guest with a man that is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said unto the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him fourfold. And Jesus said unto him, This day is salvation come to this house, for so much as he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man is come to seek and save that which was lost. Here we see the story of Zacchaeus, who was considered by all the people around him to be a sinner, to be a man that no one should be associated with because he was a publican. And Jesus is just walking through, right? He's just walking by, and Zacchaeus hears of this, and he says, I have to see Jesus. I have to just see him. I just have to get a look at him. He didn't even need to talk to him. He just wanted to see him. And he gets there, and there's a crowd of people, and he can't see anything. Okay, how am I going to do this? And Zacchaeus decides, I'm going to climb up a tree so that I can just get a glimpse at Jesus. Zacchaeus was a man on a mission. He was going to see Jesus. He was going to see him no matter what obstacle stood in the way. Whether he had to fight through a group of people, whether he had to climb up a tree, whatever was going to happen, Zacchaeus was going to see Jesus that day. And as Jesus is walking, there's a group of people constantly following him. And he looks up and he sees this man in the tree. And he sees him. He says, Come down. Come down from the tree, and I'm going to join you at your house for dinner. Jesus looked at Zacchaeus, and I have no doubt he looked at him, and he saw a man who was seeking him. Jesus looked, and he said, That man in the tree, he's doing everything he can just to find me, just to see me. So I'm going to share that salvation that I have to offer with him. And as Christians, we need to be like Zacchaeus. Whenever we become Christians, we need to continue to pursue Jesus. We may have found Jesus, but we have to continually look and search for him throughout our lives. We have to find those moments where we can pursue after him and follow the things that he does. But Zacchaeus was not a Christian at this time. The world considered him a sinner. So before we become Christians, when we're living in that life of sin, we have to look and we have to seek out Jesus. We have to be looking for, how can I learn more? How can I prepare myself to be ready to make that commitment to God, to that commitment to Christ through baptism? He looks, and Jesus needs us to be like Zacchaeus. That no matter what stands in our way, no matter what obstacles are in front of us, we will make sure that we find Jesus and that we will see him, even just for a glimmer, because that is our chance at salvation. So much of the world goes around never looking for Jesus. They never want to part with Jesus. They want Jesus to just be a thing that they can throw out. But we need people who are seeking Jesus, Because whenever you seek him, he will help you find that salvation that we all need. So whether we're a Christian or whether we're not a Christian, I hope that Jesus can look down and say, there's a person who's seeking after me, who's doing everything they can to find me and my salvation. And now our favorite example is Stephen in Acts chapter 7. We'll be reading from verses 54 through 56 because Acts chapter 7, we just don't have the time to read through it all this morning, or else Ethan will get very upset that I spoke for too long. So we got to just kind of summarize it. But Acts 7 is a chapter that shows Stephen's great strength. Stephen goes to the high priest and he teaches them a history lesson. In the history lesson, he goes through all of the history of the Jews. But it boils down to the fact that every time God sent a prophet, the Jews rejected him. They killed him, they sent him away, they didn't listen to him. It was a reoccurring theme. And Stephen boils it down and he says, listen, this Messiah that was prophesied, he has come. He has lived, he has died, and now there is a way for you to go, but you are too ignorant and naive to find him. The high priest did not like that. They were not a fan of being told that they had repeated the mistakes of their fathers. They were so angry that they had begun to attack him. And so we're going to begin reading in verse 54. In verse 54 it says, when they heard these things, they were cut to the heart, and they gnashed on him with their teeth. But he, being full of the Holy Ghost, looked up steadfastly into heaven, and he saw the glory of God, and Jesus standing on the right hand of God, and said, behold, I see the heavens open, and the Son of Man standing on the right hand of God. Now I have to be honest with you, this is my favorite imagery of the entire lesson. I love this idea, because Stephen is in the midst of being attacked. He is in one of the worst situations. He's about to die, and he looks to heaven, and he sees God, and he sees Jesus standing on the right hand of God. Many times throughout the Bible, we're told that Jesus is sitting at the right hand of God. But here I think that God specifically says standing. I don't know if you as a child, but as a parent, I've really learned this. Whenever I think that something's wrong with McKinley or he looks uncomfortable, I start to stand, I'm antsy, I'm like, all right, I'm ready for whatever's coming. That's the concern that I have for him. And whenever I read this, that's what I see from Jesus. I see that Jesus was next to God, and he saw his servant Stephen being attacked and in trouble, and he stood in concern to look for him and to be there for him. And so I just love this idea of Jesus standing there, ready to help and comfort Stephen. And as we think about this, we hopefully will find ourselves in these situations. And I say hopefully because as Christians, we're not promised an easy life. Jesus says that there's going to be times of struggle, there's going to be times of persecution, there are going to be times where it is hard. But as Christians, we hope that Jesus looks down and sees us standing for what is right. Stephen was standing in the face of death, and he continued to act on his faith and stand strong for Jesus. And this is what Jesus asked us to do in Revelation 2:10, where he says, be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life. Jesus says, no matter what comes your way, no matter what struggles you face, stand strong. Be a faithful Christian and stand what is right. I pray that we never have to face the times like Stephen did, where standing for our faith cost us our life. But I don't want to diminish what we go through on a daily basis. We may not have our lives threatened physically, but there's a lot of persecution. There's a lot of things that we have to go through that are hard. It's hard to live the Christian life, but we know that if we stand firm, if we stand strong in God's word, Jesus is standing there looking at us and saying, that right there, that's my servant. That's the person that I want all of my disciples to be like. Standing strong for the truth, standing for Jesus no matter what comes his way, no matter what he is faced with, he will stand firm for me. And this is where everything culminates. Hopefully we go through all these stages in our lives, but at the end of the day, Jesus can look at us and say, that right there, that's my servant. That's my servant who's going to stand still, stand strong, and hold fast to what I have taught in my teachings, no matter what comes his way. And it's an amazing thing whenever Jesus can look at us like that and say, That's my servant. And so this morning, we have looked at several ways that Jesus looks down and sees us. And so now we have to answer the question of, how does Jesus see me? And the only way that you can answer this question is through honest self-examination. To truly look at yourself and break down where you are in your life and figure out what Jesus sees in your life. So this morning, are you like Saul, who is lost, standing in opposition to Jesus? And if that is you, Jesus offers you the same opportunity of salvation that he offered Saul in that time through baptism. Or maybe you're like Peter, who was once a faithful disciple of Jesus, and now you've fallen away. You've fallen into that sin. And again, you can repent and be restored back to being his disciple. Or maybe you're like Zacchaeus, and you have been searching for Jesus. You've been looking out for Jesus, and this morning you have found him, and you are ready to put him on in baptism and be saved just like Zacchaeus. But I pray that we can all look at our lives, and if you are a faithful Christian, say that I'm like Stephen. I'm like Stephen, standing there strong, no matter what is in my way, no matter what presses towards me, I stand strong, and I will not falter on my beliefs. So this morning, if you need to put Christ on in baptism, or if you have any other needs from the congregation, please come forward as we stand and sing.
Wonderful story